So I'm directing the research work of the NYU Stern Center for Business and Human Rights. As our center was started in 2013, we were the very first center at a business school. Stern is the business school of New York University. It's our mission to challenge and empower future leaders to make practical progress on human rights. And in our research, we seek to understand how business operates in different industry settings. We then analyze those core business processes and make suggestions how companies can advance human rights. This is a novel perspective in this emerging business and human rights field, and it's increasingly business relevant, as you will see in this presentation. Our work rests upon a commitment that heads of states made exactly 70 years ago to fundamental human rights. On this picture, you can see Eleanor Roosevelt. She was the chairperson of the UN Commission for Human Rights in 1948. The preamble of this document, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, states that every organ in society should strive to promote respect for those fundamental rights and freedoms enshrined in this document. So every organ of society, that really means everybody, governments, individuals, but also corporations. The Universal Declaration is more relevant than ever given the world we live in. Here's a map of the world from the Fund for Peace. It's a think tank that has assessed the fragility of countries over the course of the past 10 years. And as you can see here, a lot of countries are color-coded in yellow, orange, and red. These are the countries considered particularly fragile and prone to violence. Somewhat related, the second world map from the Economist's Intelligence Unit tracks the state of our democracies in the world. The site allows for comparisons over time, and from 2006 to 2016, the number of countries that are considered full democracies has gone down from 26 to 19. Another important development is the rise of multinational corporations in a globalized economy. Out of the 100 biggest economic entities in the world, 69 are corporations, not countries. If Walmart would be a country, it would be the 10th biggest in the world, just as big as Canada. And against this background, it's clear that the government's capacity to protect human rights is in decline. And with the rising power of multinational corporations, there's a growing consensus that these corporations have a role to play in the implementation of human rights. And so in the context of our center, we conduct industry-specific studies to better understand how companies impact human rights and what role companies can play to advance human rights. So for example, we've looked into the global supply chains of the garment industry and assessed what Western garment brands such as H&M or C&A, how they purchase their goods and how these purchasing practices affect sweatshops in production countries. We've also looked into the human rights issues in the construction industry in Gulf states, and we've analyzed the role of recruitment firms that contribute to workers' misery. We've also looked into the indicators that investors are currently using to assess a company's human rights risks. And most recently, we have worked closely with the World Economic Forum's Global Future Agenda Council to understand the role of internet companies for the human right to freedom of expression. From a human rights perspective, the internet is a magnificent thing. It does a lot of good for its 3.5 billion users. It has enabled the right to expression in a lot of places in the world where this right is restricted. It has catalyzed political revolutions. Some say the Arab Spring would have not been possible without the internet. It also facilitates access to education, access to healthcare, and it creates economic opportunities. Some studies say that if everybody would be connected to the internet, it would help to eradicate extreme poverty. More recently, however, the internet has become polluted with harmful content. Arguably most dangerous for human rights in our democracies are politically motivated disinformation, also called fake news, and terrorist incitement. So to illustrate, this chart shows that before the 2016 US elections, the most popular fake news stories were shared more frequently than mainstream news stories. And there's evidence now that election meddling did not just affect the US, but also elections in France and Germany. Terrorists like ISIS have also used the internet to disseminate their hate messages globally. It's estimated that ISIS sends up to 200,000 messages per day via social media platforms. And so these developments raise the question about the role of internet companies in this debate. We argue that given their centrality in the flow of communications worldwide, they have a unique position and a unique responsibility, namely to advance democratic principles and the cause of human rights. These firms are neither just neutral hosts that provide the infrastructure that enables freedom of expression, nor is it desirable that they become full content editors or publishers. Their role lies in between those extreme positions. So in our report, we show that a more proactive stance on harmful content is a genuine business interest of internet companies. In fact, I would even argue there's a business case for human rights to be made here. So we have looked into the revenues of those firms, and they're essentially online ad companies. The first column, you see the total revenue for the biggest social media platforms. And then in the second column, you see the percentage of ad revenue, of company revenue. And Microsoft has a different business model, but Google, Facebook, and Twitter, 89% of their revenue comes from online ads. This business model is under threat if ads are placed next to controversial content. Last year, several brands suspended their advertising contracts with those platforms because their ads were placed next to controversial content, for example, homophobic messages or anti-Semitic messages. So you may ask, what could be solutions to counter the flood of fake news and terrorism online while protecting freedom of speech? Almost 100 years ago, the US Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis argued that more speech is the remedy to fight bad speech. However, he also pointed out that the more speech solution only works if there's time to expose through discussion the fallacies and falsehood. Today, there's often no time to do that. The speed and scale of the internet has eroded the more speech solution. As I participated in the Internet Governance Forum in December last year here in Geneva at the UN, a representative of Google explained that per minute, 400 hours of content are being uploaded to their platform. Well, alternatively, some countries have tried to legislate in this realm. And Germany, for example, has since January 1 this year a fully effective so-called hate speech law. This means that internet platform companies have to take down controversial flagged content within 24 hours. Otherwise, they would face hefty fines of up to $500,000. The law is discussed very controversially. The definition of hate speech is vague and ever-evolving, which makes the implementation of this law complicated and basically places the responsibility of defining what hate speech is on those companies. The fines also create incentives that companies take down a lot more content than absolutely necessary. And if Germany stands as a model for countries that are not full democracies, Germany is one of the few countries that is considered a full democracy, it may also open the door for repressive regimes to use such laws to censor content. So in our report, we suggest a combination of strategies, and it's encouraging that some of the companies have already started implementing some of these. But it's clear that even greater efforts are needed. So to conclude, I want to highlight some of these measures for companies, governments, and educators. The first recommendation is for companies to refine their algorithms and to increase human oversight of content. Given the scope of the internet, companies are using artificial intelligence to flag what's considered controversial content. The flagged material is then sent over to so-called content analysts, humans. And this human oversight is necessary because in order to evaluate the context in which the controversial material was uploaded. So maybe someone just wanted to make a joke, or it was a satire site. To further improve those processes, Facebook and Google have both committed to hire more humans for this process. And both have hired thousands last year, and I think their headcount will go up to 10,000 each in 2018. Another recommendation of ours is for companies to introduce more friction. So what does this mean? Let me give you two examples. So recently, YouTube has toughened its stance towards videos that contain inflammatory, religious, or supremacist content, but do not quite cross the line and violate company policies. Such material now comes with a warning and is not eligible for recommended status, endorsements, or user comments. Similarly, Facebook has introduced fact-checking functions and uses third-party fact-checkers. And when content is highly disputed, Facebook discourages sharing. We also recommend to advance industry collaboration. This means that companies that are essentially competitors will share knowledge in order to maximize the benefits of combating problematic content. The goal of collaboration should also be to develop substantive standards and metrics that are consistent with international human rights protections and provide companies with clear guidance about the role they can and should play in this area. There are two examples that I want to point out. First, the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism. In this group, Google, Facebook, and Twitter create a common database of digital fingerprints to identify violent extremist content. They currently work with over 50 smaller companies to share their knowledge. Another example is the Global Network Initiative, which focuses on freedom of expression and privacy in a multi-stakeholder setting. So it's not just industry discussing these pertinent issues, but it's a setting where academics and civil society organizations are part of. We think these collective actions need to be intensified further. We have seen them to be very effective. The multi-stakeholder model has been very effective in other industry contexts. For example, in the garment industry, where the Fair Labor Association has, since 2000, helped companies to figure out this difficult terrain. We also think there's a role for governments, and we need to identify this role. Instead of legislating, which, as I explained, has these unintended consequences, governments could promote media literacy. There's a mission, this is a mission that governments could take on without threatening free speech. And finally, I think we also need to rethink education in this context. While all the other recommendations aim at immediate fixes to the problem, we also need a long-term strategy that reflects on how we train our future leaders. These broader societal issues are business relevant, and future leaders, from the software developer to the manager to the CEO, need to take these into account when they make business decisions. To this end, our center at NYU has created a network of business schools that jointly wants to advance human rights and business education. We launched this network in November last year here at the University of Geneva. And this is a book I published. And this is a picture from that event. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights came to endorse the initiative. So I thank you for the attention. If this is a topic that interests you, please come and talk to me during the break. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting because underlying, so I think, like Maya, there's this idea that there's going to be computers enforcing social rules and who defines the rules and how computers do. Also, what I find very interesting, there's this whole debate of automation and humans being out of work. And what you're saying is that we need more automation alongside humans, and that we need also to think collectively, that it's not, as I was saying earlier, like startups in one corner and large corporation in another one and government is in another one. Like everybody has a stake in the solution. Can I ask you one thing? You have 2 young kids. Is there, you think about these issues, like, is there anything specific in the way you raise them in their, they're pretty young, but in the way they're going to relate to technology? Did your job give you some insights or some rules you applied to them that you could share with the audience?
Well, my kids are really young, and we've tried to implement a no-screen policy for the first years. My oldest is 6, the little one is 18 months. But of course, they will grow up in an entirely different environment than we did. And so I think there are no parenting rules yet on how to navigate this world. But my daughter knows that I'm here today, and I'm trying to engage her in these discussions as much as this is possible at this age.
So education.
Yeah, and discussing what is acceptable content, what is harmful content. I think this is something I will engage them with going forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Dorothee, Baumann-Pauly, sorry.